As public colleges and universities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have increasingly sought to understand and assess the quantitative literacy skills of their students, the challenge has been to provide faculty and staff and administrators at those institutions with faculty and professional development to help them understand the nature of quantitative reasoning and quantitative literacy skills, the positioning of those skills within programs, courses, and assignments, and also frameworks to help faculty members to better design assignments that can help students to access their quantitative literacies. In this video, I'll review a project that I undertook along with Dr. Bob Awkward at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education and Dr. Marianne Winklemes, who directs the Center for Teaching and Learning at Brandeis University, to provide a distributed remote faculty development opportunity to all public higher education institutions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 2019. The aim of this project was to provide opportunities for faculty, staff, and administrators who work on issues around general education and quantitative literacy on their campuses to have an experience of understanding the nature of quantitative literacy skills, the variety of ways in which those skills are situated within their programs and courses, and also ways of understanding how to transparently design assignments so that students will understand the hows and the whys of doing quantitative literacy in their courses. So here was the goal of the project. We wanted to offer faculty development workshops for public higher education institutions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that address both quantitative literacy and also transparency in assessment, focusing on a combination of using in-person as well as remote facilitation. Now, we planned this in the summer and fall of 2019, so this is a pre-pandemic feature. So doing this distributed remote workshop was an idea that we hoped would help us to reach more faculty without all of the overhead of needing to travel and gather groups together, that we could gather the groups where they were, sort of regionally throughout Massachusetts. So these workshops ended up running in the fall of 2019 and were supported by funding from the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. First thing I want to tell you a little bit about is the QL piece of the workshop, designed to help faculty and participants to understand what is quantitative literacy, what does it look like at different scales. This was the portion of the workshop that I designed and helped to facilitate, both with live facilitators and also remotely via Zoom. And for it, I constructed an interactive video using the H5P platform I'll tell you a little bit about. The second piece was headed up by Marianne Winklemes and is about transparency in assessment. How can we clearly design assignments and assessments for courses that help students to understand how to do quantitative tasks, but also why to do quantitative tasks, and what do those tasks sort of consist of? How do they break them down into the parts, the steps that they need to be successful in them? And for Marianne's portion of the workshop, she had participants get into small groups and do some small group work with, again, a live facilitator that was there in person, with her connecting as a remote facilitator via Zoom. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the results and the feedback from both participants and the facilitators in the work that was done. So for the introductory portion, what is quantitative literacy? There were sort of four objectives that I had. First of all, to help participants to distinguish between mathematics per se and quantitative literacy. So we keep those skill sets separate in the way that if you're watching this video, you've probably heard. And to sort of remake that case for quantitative literacy. Why is it an important skill for general education for our particular college students at this particular point in our history? And then the goal was to sort of give a broad overview of both what are called the big Q implementations of quantitative literacy, places that quantitative literacy appears in a central fundamental way to entire programs, disciplines, entire sequences of courses, and so forth. And then also to overview some of the small Q implementations of quantitative literacy. These can be individual courses, even individual assignments and portions of assignments that could be anywhere in the curriculum that help to activate and get students thinking about those quantitative skills. So for this part of the workshop, I created an interactive video that a live facilitator on site helped the group of faculty members to sort of work through and participate in. And then after that video was over, I returned as a remote facilitator live via Zoom to do some small group interaction and do some Q&A at the end. And the interactive video, if you're not familiar with it, uses a platform called H5P. It's a free tool that lets you essentially take a video and create interactivity points within it. So places where the video pauses and asks for feedback or input from the viewers. So this could be a place where For example, there might be 3 different topics and we only want viewers to watch one, and so they click a button inside the video and it takes them to one. You can also use it as a form of sort of interactive quizzes. And so that was a way in which the video was created to adapt to the interest of the participants a little bit. So there's about 35 minutes of content in the full video, but based on participants' choices, they only end up watching about 20 minutes worth of video at the end of the day. So it's a little bit differentiated. We weren't quite sure in the beginning who was going to be in the audience for these sessions, and so we tried to make something that could be flexible to what they wanted to hear about the most. So this was generally the first half of the workshops that participants did. The second half was the transparency in teaching and learning aspect of the workshop. This was Marianne Winklemes' work. She runs a project called Tilt Higher Ed. The Tilt is for transparency in teaching and learning. And the goal of Tilted faculty development, this is an ongoing faculty development project, is to help faculty and students to think about the hows and the whys of how they're doing certain learning tasks in their classes, and more importantly, why they're doing those tasks, so that students understand both the structure and the function of the learning outcomes that they're being held to in their classes and how to succeed in them. And so for this particular workshop, Marianne focused on the assignment design part of the TILT framework. And a transparent assignment design is one in which the purpose for the assignment is very clearly articulated, so that students know both why they're doing this for the sake of the course learning, but also why they're doing this for the longer term. So why is this assignment going to be a significant thing for them to do, not just this semester, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So what is the purpose? Secondly, breaking down the task, giving students that step-by-step that many students often crave if they're working in an unfamiliar skill set and still developing their expertise. So what exactly do we want students to do, and how exactly should they be doing it? This is also a good place to transfer some expertise from the instructor to the students. What steps should you follow, and then what pitfalls might you encounter along the way, and how do you avoid those? And finally, criteria for success. Let students in on that evaluation and assessment process. Not how will you as the instructor know that they've been successful, but how can students know that they have been successful in the task as they're doing it? So provide them with checklists and rubrics in advance, help them to understand what those rubrics mean and what excellence actually looks like. So this was a very interactive portion of the workshop where Marianne led small groups through some hands-on activities with the live facilitator helping to smooth out the interactions, and with Marianne serving as a remote expert facilitator via Zoom. So that ended up being the second half of the workshop, and because it was an in-person workshop, there was also a sort of a working lunch into which often our first 2 activities ended up spilling into that time because participants wanted to keep working and wanted to keep talking. And indeed, that was one of the big pieces of feedback that we got from participants at the end of the day. They found it was a very, very useful workshop for them, and they especially were grateful for the transparency in teaching and learning content that came along with the workshop. But both they and Marianne and myself and Bob as facilitators felt that what we really wanted more time to work with the folks that were there. It was generally a very engaged and very cross-disciplinary group, and having those local facilitators to help us as remote facilitators to actually pull off this workshop was really, really helpful for us. And there were some institutions that had teams that sort of arrived and they were already ready to go because they'd already gelled. Some institutions sent their sort of general education teams to this workshop. And we felt like those institutions might have had a critical mass of faculty already engaged in this kind of work that could be built upon for continuing work around transparent assignment design, assessment, and quantitative literacy. In the end, we ran 4 regional workshops in Massachusetts, a northern, a Boston region, a central, and a western. Those happened during September and October of 2019. And we had a southeast regional meeting scheduled for March of 2020 to coincide with the SEQuEL conference in 2020. And we all know what happened in March of 2020 that made that impossible. So we had plans for 5 sessions, ended up actually running the 4. And this asynchronous session that we're running right here at SEQuEL 2021 can kind of be a breadcrumb of something that could be picked up on for the future. So we felt that not only was this a valuable experience, particularly for the faculty members that were looking for how do I make my assignment designs more comprehensible to my students by making the learning outcomes and the processes more transparent for them. That seems to be a major barrier for students in developing quantitative literacy, and participants thought that this was a really helpful way to help them to get specific about QL in their assignment designs. And as a jumping off point for further work, we're hoping that these resources, which are available at the links that you can see below me right here, can be shared forward to anyone who has interest in these topics. The interactive video for what is quantitative literacy, that is available publicly. You can share it out and people can sort of view it and consume it on their own. The Tilt Higher Ed website has just a wealth of information and resources on the various different ways that faculty can be more transparent in their teaching and learning and assessment processes. As well as the ability to sort of join that network and participate in some of the experimental designs that go on around, showing not only is this affectively helpful for students, but transparency actually helps them to learn their topics better as well. And then finally, there's a link underneath me here to the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education's Learning Outcomes Assessment page with more information on the other activities that the DHE is undertaking related to the assessment of student learning outcomes. And that's it. Feel free to check out the resources at the links that you'll see in the description below this video, and we hope that you find them useful.